Hi, I'm Callum from Retro Power. Since 2020 we've been doing a weekly walk around our workshop called the Uncut series, where we show the progress on the various projects we're working on. We thought it would be really cool if we edited together all the segments that relate to each individual project into one series, so you can actually follow the build of an individual project start to finish. So that's what we've done. Welcome to the Dream Car Build series. But then we've also just today done the blast on this, so metalwork pace on this over the last week, because we wanted to round in a few blasting jobs together, has been absolutely frenetic, trying to get all of the remaining metalwork done so that today we could blast this, zinc spray it and epoxy it, and we have to do that in really quick succession, because you don't want to leave that bare blasted finish really any length of time at all exposed to the humidity in the air, because you'll start to get corrosion, you know, some level of corrosion, even if it's not very visible to the eye, which will then be sealed in. So it's important that we had this ready in the blast booth last thing last night, so we could literally start blasting it first thing this morning, blast it, clean it all out, get the zinc metal spray done, then get it onto a trolley, get it into here, and get the epoxy coat over the upper side of it. So at that point it's completely covered and sealed in. But the build up to that over the last week has just been a lot of metalwork. I mean, one of the biggies that we hadn't even started last episode, I don't think, was the seam brazing. So basically every spot welded seam on the car has been TIG brazed. I think Scott did all of that on this one. That's brazing using a TIG torch, but with a copper rod. And we do that just because it's a lot less brittle than using steel rod. It's actually a copper silicon alloy. It only has a tiny amount of silicon in it, but that brings the strength of the copper up to something that's very comparable to steel, but is considerably more less susceptible to cracking. One of the reasons particularly is because you tend to get porosity in a weld with steel rod. Whereas with the copper, the impurities kind of float to the surface during the process of actually welding it on there. So it's just a nicer way to do it, and it just that seam brazing process adds a huge amount of stiffness to the shell. We go around all the apertures. These obviously have to be ground back fairly carefully so that there's no bulging in the seals, but literally the edges of every open aperture, the door apertures, all the window apertures have been seam brazed, and then every spot welded seam throughout the rest of the car. We put these gusset plates on, which we made a while ago actually. We've just been waiting until we were doing the brazing, because we knew we wanted to braze those on as well. And then some of the other details, it's all essentially been making provision for parts that are going to go onto the car eventually, some of which is plumbing and wiring related, some are other components. So if I start at the front, we're doing a headlight modification on this car. So we're running Hella xenon headlights on it, and we're making our own custom bezels that will fit into the front panel. They're going to be, well, in fact, James has just been drawing those up on CAD this week, so once he's drawn those up, we're going to 3D print a mock-up version of that, just to make sure we're happy with the fit and the look. And Gaz will use those when he's in the bodywork stage to make sure the fit of the fiberglass wing to that bezel is good. They're eventually going to be machined from billet aluminium and anodized, and then they'll sit over the little round Hella xenon units. The units themselves will bolt into a back plate, which will then be bolted to this flat surface. So we wanted to get rid of the original complicated headlamp aperture and just put a simpler bezel around there. So we've just done some simple back plates that are spot welded in for those. There's also, I think last week we were doing the mounts for the ballasts. There's some brackets that went underneath here, and we put weld bosses in to mount those, which hold the ballasts for those headlamp units. And then we've done the holes underneath here now, where the wires will feed up and come to those lamp units each side, and deleted the original wiring hole, which wasn't really in the place we wanted it. We've spaced those out to the same spacing as the lamps, so as the wires come up to the lights, they'll be nice and parallel. And then the provision for the wiring to those, so there's a hole here now where a grommet will feed a wire through to that lamp. It'll run across these weld bosses here, through that grommet. There's a weld boss under here, then that'll feed those lights on that side. Then there's a hole on the inner wing here and a load of weld bosses running down, which is where all of that front end loom will go, and then in through a hole in the inner wing down there, which then comes out right next to the mounting plate where we've designed bosses into the inner panel there, which is where the PDU will mount, which is the unit that will control all the electrical systems on the car. So the wire routing from that will be really nice. It'll just come straight off the PDU, straight out through that hole to the front. The rear loom will go down the sill, over the sort of inner arch at the back there, and then into the hollow section that's been created where we've bulkheaded off our fuel tank area to the rear lights, which also are going to be billet machine bezels with a more modern LED light inside, basically as per the front, our own design of light. What else have we been doing? So earth points, that's an earth point there. There's an M8 boss down here for the engine earth point. We've got a mounting boss here for the horn. We've done a fabricated plinth here, which is where the Mocal remote filter housing will bolt. And we've sort of finalised how we're going to do all the oil pipe routing. So we'll obviously have the dry sump tank here. That will feed down to the high pressure part of the dry sump pump. That then feeds across bosses which will be welded to the bottom tank of the radiator to the remote filter head. The other side of that then feeds the inlet to the engine, which is on this side. And then the scavenge pump then pumps back out. Pipes will come through here to the cooler, which we've already done the mounts for, and then back through to fill the tank. So the pipe routing will be really neat for that. We've done a mount down here for the fuel pressure regulator. We've also done all sorts of little details, like the washer tank is normally on with self tappers. We wanted to change that to riv nuts, so we've drilled those out to riv nut size. We've done a hole here for our battery bulkhead post, so there's a post that transfers the battery cable from the inside of the car to the engine bay, which will sit into a hole there. These two holes here are extinguisher jet holes. Fuel lines will come through those two down there. So it's basically just thinking forward and planning every part of the installation of all of the plumbing and making provision for that now. Over on the scuttle there, you can see there's two holes there for the extinguisher and isolator buttons. We've deleted the screen wash jets. We wanted spray bars on the wipers arms, so we've deleted the original holes. There's a little bulkhead hole here, which will be where one of the pipes comes through on a little 4mm bulkhead connector, where that pipe will then feed up to the wiper arm. It wasn't really necessary this side because we'll just feed it through the slots that are already in the scuttle there. So that's that. Mounts for the rear view mirror off the cage. We've got tabs on the cage down here for the extinguisher nozzles that will point towards the occupants. We've done a mount for the brake bias controller on the cage there. James has been working on the floor plates. That was one of the last things to go in. So you saw previously we were mounting a floor mount pedal box on the driver's side, obviously. That will sit onto a plate that sits right back into the footwell and creates a more visually appealing flat floor. And we're going to do a flat plate on the passenger side too. We've got a really cool technique for doing bosses in floors for things like that. So we CAD draw up the panel to start with the bolt holes in the places we want them. But then we do a version that's got big cutouts next to those holes, which allow you access through, and then we bolt the bosses onto the back, or lay the panel in and measure up what depth those bosses need to be, machine up the bosses, then bolt them to this template panel, sit that in. The access hole allows you to weld them into place, and then take the bolts out, take the panel back out, and it means that you've got a CAD drawing that you can use for the final footplate, which has got all the hole spacings exactly as they were welded into the car. So you're not faffing around trying to drill out holes because they're not quite in the right place. So that's quite a cool technique. What else have we done? There's some little threaded bosses in the tunnel which are going to hold some billet brackets which hold the Motec keypad over the top of the handbrake. We put that there, A, because it falls to hand nicely, and B, because that Motec keypad will then cover up the plumbing from the handbrake master cylinder, just make that look a little bit neater. We put all the holes in for the routing of the brake line to the rear there, the fuel lines from the fuel enclosure to the front, which will run down the passenger side of the tunnel. Moving on to the back, we put the mounts in, or the support rails for the fuel tank and the brackets, which will then bolt the straps to, which hold the fuel tank down. There's also various M5 bosses over this side. They'll hold a plate that holds the fuel pump and filter over there, and also clipping the fuel line up from where it comes from the pump and filter towards the bulkhead holes here, where they'll feed into the cockpit. All these brackets around here, they've been attached. They'll be what hold the the brackets that allow us to clamp the carbon panel down onto here. So this piece here we previously showed, we'd cut out an aluminium template piece just to check that shape. But the CAD drawing for that will then be going over to the composites company we use, KS Composites, who will be making us a Nomex carbon honeycomb panel that sits into there. We've welded up the badge holes on the back because we're going to do our own badging on this. Plan there is to use the Vauxhall script font, but make our own machined letters. This is Project Vader, if you hadn't picked that up already. The reason for that will become more obvious as it makes its transformation to being black. And we'll probably do the Vader lettering on the back there. We've done a little screw-in towing eye, so there's not really a good towing point on these. There's some lashing points further forward, but they're not very convenient. So we've done a threaded piece under there and made a threaded in towing eye so you can take that out when you're not using it. And I think that's probably about it. There was a lot of going around welding up little self-tapper holes for old bits of trim where the sides of the parcel shelf used to go, for example. There were loads of little self-tapper holes in there. So the goal really is to try and weld up all of the holes that we're not going to be using, and then obviously put holes in for everything we are going to do. Inevitably there'll be something we've missed and we'll have to drill a hole somewhere, but the idea is to try and get as much of that as possible, and I think we have. So really looking forward to seeing this transform now. It's over to Gary really now to start prepping this. He's going to probably start with the seam sealing and general prep work on it. And these motorsport type builds are always demanding on the prep, particularly on the inside, because there's just so many nooks and crannies that are going to be seen and need to be in a visible painted finish. Whereas actually you'd almost think a motorsport build should have a cheaper paint job, but actually if anything they're more difficult, because on a road car, the inside, you basically just make sure it's well prepared, cover it all with something, Raptor usually in our case, but the exact finish of it isn't that critical because it's all going to be covered with carpet or trim. Whereas on this, the vast majority of the interior metalwork is going to be visible, so there's a lot more effort has to go into the prep work. And then if you get into things like contrasting coloured roll cages, then it becomes an absolute pain in the bum, because the amount of masking you have to do to mask out the rest of the shell when you paint the cage or vice versa, and then trying to get in and trying to get a decent finish on all the sides to it, it's a demanding job. So I don't envy Gaz's job on that one. Quick little bit, literally we haven't just set this up for camera, this was being worked on earlier. These are parts for the Chevette that we're building at the moment. Front cross member, which we modified for a different engine mount setup. Scott's just been fully welding that up. It was all mocked up in the car, but it needed fully welding, so he's been fully welding that up. He's been fully welding the various bits that were either spot welded or only lightly welded in production. He's fully welded all those bits. Let's give it a bit more strength. Atlas axle, that's going, fully floating Atlas axle that's going in the back of that. That's going to be going off the powder coat, but prior to that it needs all the bracketry welding on. So he's just welded on the 4-link trailing link brackets, welded on the panhard rod bracket, which is like an adjustable height rose jointed panhard rod bracket, and then we've just got to plasma cut the damper brackets, which are going on the rear of the axle on this, not on the top like in an Escort. On the Chevette, because we're using the standard turret positions, the damper brackets or the coilover brackets come off the rear of the axle, so we gusset them onto the back. So I've just got to cut those brackets. Well, I need to do a slight edit on a drawing because the last set I did weren't for this axle tube diameter, so I've just got to tweak the drawing on that, and then we'll cut the damper brackets for that. And then these plates, these have just been blasted up and prepped. They just need bending to fit the bottom of the arm, and or welded in there, just skid plates on the lower arms just to reinforce those, and then we'll fully weld a few sights on the lower arms. We're not going to do a full sort of rally spec job on the lower arms. We're keeping the normal ball joints, not the Manta type 8SR type ball joints. The normal ones are perfectly good for road use, even very hard road use, they're fine. But some of the weld areas can be a little bit weak, so we're just going to weld those up, weld these strengthening plates on, and then all these bits will go off zinc metal spray and powder coat, and then they'll be back ready for assembly. Because we've got a new guy starting next week who we'll introduce in the next episode. But Gaz will have an accomplice in the body shop, and he will be ploughing on with the Chevette. We have been tickling along with jobs on the Chevette while we wait for the ability to start the bodywork on it. Obviously we talked about the axle and the front subframe, etc., going for powder coat, and James has just been templating the doors and the inner quarter panels for the carbon fibre trim panels that we're going to make for those. So we've been tickling along with a lot of little jobs in the background that will enable us to get it all together much more quickly once the bodywork's done. And then, yeah, next episode we'll be flat out with the initial prep and filler work on that shell. So very, very excited to see that sort of progress to paint. In fact, the owner sent me a picture of a black, we're painting it black, oh, that's just ruined the fun, hasn't it? But the owner sent me a picture of a black one with the same kit on today. It's the first time I've seen one in a long while where I thought, wow, that looks absolutely stunning. So it sort of reaffirmed my excitement to see that reach paint. To the Chevette, which we are pressing on with at the moment. Gaz has started bodywork operations on it again now, restarted bodywork operations on it again. Now he's got the shell to work on. Steve's now with us. He's helping Gaz working on this. They're cracking on. They're just doing the rough shaping of everywhere that needs shaping. Continuing making the body kit fit. We've mentioned it before, there are lots of problems, they don't fit, so it's just the making it all fit job, shaping the door, finishing shaping the door gaps, he's going to fit the side sills I think imminently, get on with that. These paint strippered, the roof, bonnet, doors, because they're original metal, the bonnet's getting louvered tomorrow. Once the paint stripping had been done, all the doors are being all the surfaces are being flatted. Any filler work needed being done there. There's not an awful lot though, to be honest. They're all fairly good. I think there's a bit needed in the doors, but a lot of the rest of it's pretty good. And then talking of shaping, I think you've seen one before, but we've now printed both the headlamp bezel units for the front of the car, for the dual projector headlamp units that are going in each side. We're using Hella projector headlamp units. And the bezels for those have been printed for both sides now, because basically this area of the wing on these body kits is completely nondescript. It could be for another car, pretty much. So we're using the 3D prints from those, which have been modelled to what a Chevette headlight should look like. That side of the shape of that side of a headlight should look like, and then we can then shape the wing and make sure that the wing is going to fit to that unit. That's why we've 3D printed those before, because they will be machined in aluminium, but we've printed them for now so that we can use them as templates for the shape. So that's they're cracking on with that and getting all that sorted. Then in the background to all that, and tied into some other work as well, the batch of powder coating has come back from BG Pennies, the powder coaters that we use in Coventry, who do an amazingly good job. Big shout out for those. They're just absolutely superb to deal with. It's again one of the very few jobs we do send out, and they're absolutely faultless. I can't really sing their praises enough. They have blasted, zinc metal sprayed and gloss black powder coated all of the major set pieces of running gear for the Chevette. They've also done the same with the major pieces of running gear for the Mustang. You may recall we had the axle from Hauser Racing. Well, that last week went to BG Pennies. That's now back. So that's also ready for being built up. But we've got the axle ready to build up for this. We've just demasked that yesterday, I think, and all the suspension components are back, ready to be bushed up. So that's nice. Basically, we've got the majority of the components to get the car rolling now. We've also had a batch of plating returned from Coma Plating, that company we use for plating. Zinc nickel plating's back, so we've got all the major suspension fasteners now back from being zinc nickel plated for the Chevette, and also a few more parts for the Mustang. I think we've already got the majority of those, but we've got some more of those back. But we've got nearly all of the fasteners we need for the running gear on the Chevette as well in hand now. And also arriving, the engine from Paul Exon Race Engines for the Chevette, the 294, I'm correct, Jamie's correcting me, 294 horsepower, 2.3 litre C20XE
Vauxhall red top engine on 52mm direct head throttle bodies. That's now arrived back. That is now in a position where we can do 1 or 2 little extraneous jobs, little dress-up type jobs, and fitting ancillary components to it. We've got to get some ancillaries, starter motor and alternator, I believe, from Wasp. We'll be getting those bolted on. Getting that bolted onto the, it's a Quaife 60G transmission, getting that bolted to the transmission, so all that then can be assembled to the front cross member and the whole lot put in the car. Obviously that's all not going to happen for a little while yet, because we're a long way back from that stage yet, but trying to run things in parallel, we're trying to get all of the sub-assemblies built in parallel with the body shell being worked on now. There's nothing to stop us getting an awful lot of work done so that it can all just be slotted, well, it's never that simple, but theoretically it can all just be slotted into the car once the car's all painted. So, yeah.
So Chevette. The familiar body shop routine of putting stuff on and sanding it off again. But we are making good progress on this now. It's the fiberglass body kit misery is we're well versed in around here. Typically nothing fits without enormous amounts of change, and everything's incredibly ripply. So we're basically in the stages at the moment of trying to smooth out all of that fiberglass and get the fit of everything to work properly, which is traumatic. I mean, even things like the door shuts. The fiberglass is so thick in the area on the back of the wing here that when you try and open the door, the front edge of the door actually hits the back of the fiberglass. And if you actually sand that out enough to get the clearance, it sands completely through. So you end up having to build up the inside of the wing at the back here to give yourself enough material to allow you to sand it forward and in from the back there to give the clearance to open the doors. And that sort of theme basically repeats throughout these fiberglass kits. It's basically one problem solving item after another, but we're getting there. Actually really broken the back of it, and the bulk of the filler work and block sanding on the steel panels is done. We've also louvered the bonnet, which was something I think Nat mentioned we were going to do last week. When the last one of these we built, we actually used a fiberglass bonnet on it, which you can get with a slight hump, but it doesn't need that for clearance. And the bonnet was such a terrible fit that we were reluctant to go through that trauma again. I remember clearly that the shape of it didn't match the front panel at all. It was just really low in the middle and really high at the sides, to the point where we had to put a buffer in the middle so that when you pinned the bonnet down at the sides, it actually pulled it down to the matching shape. And of course the other problem with fiberglass bonnets is the finish on the underside. Because it's the B surface, it takes a huge amount of sanding of that B surface on the fiberglass to get it to look even half decent, and even then they don't look perfect. So we were reluctant to use the fiberglass bonnet, but we did want to add something that set it apart from just your bog standard Chevette bonnet, something that tied in with the aggressive look of the rest of the car, and we're also keen to maximise the amount of heat that can escape from the engine bay. So we decided to just punch some louvers in, so good old-fashioned fly press with a punch tool. Gaz was doing that last week, and well, I can't remember what your message to me was. I was off that day, and it was something like, yeah, we're about to scrap a bonnet. And my message back was, right, I'll get on eBay now and start looking for a replacement. So I never heard anything the rest of Friday, so I was pleased to see when I came in on Monday that it had all gone well.
It wasn't free, people did.
Yeah. So all good fun, but yeah, we're just bashing through. They've started a bit of prep work on the inside of the doors as well. On the luxury model Chevettes, shall we say, they thought it made all the difference to extend the interior door trim panel right to the bottom of the door. It normally finished higher up and sat into a rectangular recess on the door. But to sort of set apart a higher spec level, they extended it to the bottom and drilled a load of holes around that it clipped into. Now, because we're doing carbon fibre panels, I wanted them to sit into that original rectangular recess. It looks a lot neater, slightly recessed in. But consequently, we had to delete the I don't know what even trim spec it was, LX or something, but we had to delete those holes. So in welding those, it adds a bit of distortion. So they've just been given a bit of a skim and block sanding the bottom of the inside of the door to make sure that's perfect.
We'll go through to the Chevette, which looks quite dusty still. More work on that, more panel fit, dismantling, refit, lots of build-up work on that, lots more sanding, shaping, making the headlights fit the holes, making the bumpers fit correctly, lots of smoothing out. I mean, the front bumper, you pretty much have to reshape the whole lot to get it to work properly. There's a lot of filler work involved in all this because the fiberglass panels are not really the right shape. If you fit them as they are, they're not really very good at all. So there's a lot of work to do on making everything fit there. The back of the wings, always with these kits, almost always ends up being pretty much a remake the back edge of the wing job because it just doesn't fit the door properly at all. So we're remaking that. I'm just trying to think the other bits. The rear arches are pretty close to done now. The side skirts are pretty close to done. The wings are getting close now. Front panel's getting close. The bonnet's looking nice. So it's getting pretty close. I don't think we're a million miles away now from the first coat of polyester, I'd say.